Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. This is Murli from the Michigan Satsang. Happy Advent Day. Today we have two readings. One from Face to Face with Sri Ramana Maharishi and the other from Cherished Memories by T.R. Kanakammal.
Face to Face with Sri Ramana Maharishi, 2nd edition, Chapter 55. Jaganlal V. Yogi was a businessman of Bombay who authored Sri Ramana Mahima. He first visited Sri Ramana in 1939. When I was 18, I read a lot of books by Swami Vivekananda and Swami Ram Tirtha. These implanted in me the ideal of plain living, high thinking, and life dedicated to spiritual matters. At the age of 20, I had the good fortune of contacting Mahatma Gandhi. His ideals won my heart, and for several years I faithfully tried to put them into practice. At the age of 38, skepticism began to assail me, and I began to doubt the ideals of Gandhiji. It was in this period of my life that I heard of Ramana Maharishi. One day, while traveling as usual on the train to the office, I happened to meet a friend who told me that he recently had been to Sri Ramanashramam. I said, I have an utter contempt for these so-called saints. My friend refused to give up. He insisted on impressing on me that Ramana Maharishi was not a so-called saint, but a genuine and authentic sage. He gave me a book entitled Sri Maharishi, written by Kamath, editor of the Sunday Times in Madras. I must confess, despite my prejudices, the book evoked in me an interest in the Maharishi, and I was sufficiently curious to borrow from a friend his biography, Self-Realization by B.V. Narasimha Swami. My interest in Sri Ramana began to grow without my being aware of it. Later, I felt compelled to write to Sri Ramanashramam and got all the literature on the Maharishi that was available in English. On my first visit to the ashram, I found Sri Ramana seated on a couch, as quiet and unmoving as a statue. His presence did not seem to emanate anything unusual, and I was very disappointed to discover that he displayed no interest in me. I had expected warmth and intimacy, but unfortunately, I seemed to be in the presence of someone who lacked both. From morning till evening, I sat waiting to catch a glimpse of his grace, of his interest in me, a stranger who had come all the way from Bombay. But I evoked no response. After pinning such high hopes on him, his apparent lack of interest nearly broke my heart. Eventually, I decided to leave the ashram. My mind, which was deeply tormented, felt that the psychic atmosphere in the hall was stuffy and choking. Unable to bear it any longer, I walked outside to get a breath of fresh air. A young man called Gopalan came up to me and asked where I had come from. Bombay, I replied. He asked me if I had been introduced to the master and led me to the office, and then proceeded with me to the hall where he introduced me to Bhagavan. The Maharishi sent for a copy of the Gujarati translation of the Upadesha Sharam by Kishorilal Mashruwala and asked me to chant the verses from the book. While chanting, I could feel Bhagavan keenly observing me. It seemed that the light of his eyes was suffusing my consciousness. Even without my being aware of it, his silent gaze brought about a subtle but definite transformation in me. My erstwhile sadness completely disappeared, leaving in my heart an inexplicable emotion of joy. That evening, I sat close to Bhagavan in the dining room. In my exalted state, the food I ate seemed to have an unusual and unearthly taste. I quite literally felt that I was participating in some heavenly meal in the direct presence of God. During the 3 days of my stay in the proximity of the Divine Master, I found my whole outlook entirely changed. After that short period, I could find little evidence of my old self, a self that had been tied down with all kinds of preconceptions and prejudices. I felt that I had lost the chains that bind the eyes of true vision. I became aware that the whole texture of my mind had undergone a change. The divine magician opened up for me a strange new world of illumination, hope, and joy. I felt that his presence on earth alone constituted sufficient proof that humanity, suffering and wounded because of its obstinate ignorance, could be uplifted and saved. For the first time, I fully understood the significance of darshan. At one time, I felt that my political duty as a Gandhian demanded that I should court arrest on the call of Mahatma Gandhi. But my domestic duties bade me otherwise. I found myself in a dilemma, and I could not see the way out. The situation was so unbearable for me that I had to turn to the Master for help and relief. I therefore set out for Tiruvannamalai. After reaching there, I went and sat in the holy presence of the Master. While sitting, I began to wonder how to place the difficulty before him. I decided to pour forth my prayer from the heart with a silent plea for Bhagavan's help. I began to pray, and while I concentrated on my mental plea, I watched his radiant face and sparkling eyes that were full of love and kindness. And then, astonishingly, something like a miracle began to happen. Bhagavan's face transformed itself into that of Mahatma Gandhi, while his body remained the same. As I stared at it with awe and wonder, the two faces, those of Bhagavan and Gandhiji, began to appear to me alternately in quick succession. I felt my heart filling with joy. Yet, at the same time, I was wondering whether what I saw was real or not. I turned my eyes away from Bhagavan and looked around me to see if others were seeing what I saw. Seeing no sign of wonder on their faces, I concluded that what I saw was a picture of my own imagination. I closed my eyes and sat quietly for some time. Then, as I began to look at Bhagavan's face, the vision immediately reappeared. But this time, in addition to the faces of Bhagavan and Gandhiji, those of Krishna, the Buddha, Kabir, Ramdas, and a host of other saints began to show themselves in quick succession. All my doubts vanished, and I began to enjoy that grand divine show. The vision lasted for about 5 minutes. My mind dropped all its worries, and I found myself able to hand over my problem to the capable hands of the Master. Though he spoke no words to me, it came to pass that the problem was solved without infringing either of my two duties. In fact, both duties were fulfilled satisfactorily. In 1945, I decided to wind up my printing press in Bombay and settle down at Sri Ramanashramam. I had no prearranged plan for closing down my business. I merely relied on Bhagavan. One day, in the early hours of the morning, while I was still in bed and only half awake, I saw a gentleman whom I recognized as a friend of mine. He had neither been to the ashram nor had he ever exhibited any faith in Bhagavan. The following conversation took place between Bhagavan and me. Bhagavan, you want to sell your press, don't you? Me, yes, Bhagavan, but I must find a buyer. Bhagavan, showing my friend standing by my side, here is the buyer. He will buy your press, so sell it to him. Me, since Bhagavan has been kind enough to show me the buyer, may he also favor me by stating the price at which I should execute the sale. Bhagavan then showed me a 5-digit figure on the opposite wall, shining as a neon sign. The amount indicated was reasonable. Bhagavan and my friend then disappeared and the vision ended. By itself, the vision was astonishing enough, but there was more to come. When I entered the press that day at 11 a.m., my friend from the vision was waiting for me. Of course, he had come to see me about some other work and had no idea that he had been singled out as a prospective buyer. Feeling that Bhagavan had sent him to me, I told him about the vision I had a few hours before. He listened to me very attentively. When I had finished my tale, he simply commented, "I will buy your press at the price indicated by your guru." There was no limit to my joy. My desire to sell was fulfilled by his grace, and the sale was completed in less than a minute. My original plan was to dispose of my printing press in Bombay and move to Sri Ramanashramam. However, when the devotees heard what I was planning to do, it was suggested to me that I could be of more use to the ashram in Bangalore. I was asked to start a printing press there that could execute all printing work of the ashram. I agreed to the idea and soon found myself in Bangalore, looking for suitable premises. I began to suspect that Bhagavan had assisted the sale of my original press because he had work for me to do in Bangalore. Though a stranger in the city, I could soon locate an old press that had been lying idle for some months. It was for sale. I saw its proprietor and told him why I wished to buy the press. He agreed to sell, but we were unable to finalize the price. To break the deadlock, I proposed that both of us would visit the ashram and talk about the deal after Bhagavan's darshan. I thought that since Bhagavan wanted me to do his work in Bangalore, his darshan might help to lubricate the wheels of the transaction. The owner having agreed to the idea, we set off together for the ashram. On our arrival, I took him into the holy presence of Bhagavan and informed him that I proposed to buy the press of the gentleman who was accompanying me, and that I planned to do all the ashram's printing work there. Bhagavan did not say anything. He nodded his head. Within a few hours of having had Bhagavan's darshan, there was a wonderful change in the attitude of the owner of the press. He approached me and agreed to sell his press for whatever price I was willing to pay for it. When he had agreed to come and see Bhagavan with me, he had made a stipulation that no business talk should take place at the ashram. However, after seeing Bhagavan, he proposed that we settle our business immediately. We drafted and signed a sale agreement in the ashram itself, and within a week of our visit, the press came into my possession. The new firm was named Aruna Press by Bhagavan himself. The press needed a lot of attention to get it functioning again, and by Bhagavan's grace, I was soon able to take up the ashram work as assigned to me. In 1946, the devotees proposed to bring out the Golden Jubilee souvenir to mark 50 years of Bhagavan's arrival at Arunachala. Its printing was entrusted to my press. Up till then, the press had only printed small books for the ashram. Since this was going to be a big volume of several hundred pages, I was reluctant to accept the job because I felt I would not have the time to complete the job for the Jubilee celebrations on 1st September. However, eventually I accepted the job. At first, my fears appeared to be justified. Up till 10 days before the target date, I could manage to print only a small part of the book. I lost courage, rushed to the ashram, prostrated before Bhagavan, and told him, unless the help of some other press is taken, the volume will not come out on the 1st of September. I then sat before him, enjoying his darshan, waiting for his reply. After a few moments of silence, he said in a low, melodious tone, "Do your work." These 3 simple words had a magical effect on me. They fired me with fresh vim and vigor, and then arose in my heart a strong belief that the volume would surely be out on the scheduled date. I had received the order from my master. I had simply to obey and do my work. I had faith that other details would be looked after by Bhagavan. I returned to Bangalore and told the story of my encounter to my co-workers. All of them accepted Bhagavan's order in the same spirit as I had done. For the next few days, all of us worked day and night with full faith, zeal, and enthusiasm. The amount of work turned out in those few days was, in retrospect, simply astonishing. When only 3 days were left for the deadline, a party of about 10 devotees came to my house on their way to the ashram. They were going to Tiruvannamalai to attend the Golden Jubilee celebrations. 3 of them turned out to be expert bookbinders. I immediately enlisted their help and managed to complete the work of the souvenir a day before the deadline. Bhagavan's language was that of silence. Once a collector and a deputy collector came for his darshan. The collector narrated at length the sadhanas he had done and all the spiritual literature he had read. After him, the deputy collector told his equally long story. Bhagavan continued to remain in silence even after the speeches were over. The collector said in an aggrieved voice, "We have been speaking for a long time. Please tell us something. Anything, however brief, will do." Bhagavan spoke, saying, "All this time I have been speaking to you in my own language. What can I do if you won't listen to it?" The collector, an intelligent man, caught the meaning of Bhagavan's cryptic reply. Suddenly overpowered by devotion, he fell at his feet. Both the visitors sat before Bhagavan in silent meditation. They got the peace they were looking for and departed satisfied. Bhagavan used to say, "The state that is beyond speech and thought is called mauna. Silence is eternal speech. It is the perpetual flow of language. It is the supreme language." Bhagavan was undoubtedly one of those rare Mahatmas who had the power to banish the suffering through his presence, merely through giving darshan. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Cherished Memories by T.R. Kanakammal. Chapter 16. My parents and my brothers had great regard for Sri Chandrasekharendra Saraswati Swami, the Shankaracharya of the Kanchi Kamakoti Mutt. This sage was revered as the Paramacharya. Whenever the opportunity arose, my father would go to see Paramacharya and get his blessings. In 1958, the Paramacharya was on a visit to Madras and he was staying in the Ashwamedha Mandapam in West Mambalam. One evening, when I went to see him, the Paramacharya was alone in the room except for 1 or 2 of the mutt attendants. I was very happy to have the unexpected chance to speak to him without disturbance. I had brought some fruits as offering. I placed the tray of fruits before him and prostrated. Paramacharya looked at me with a smile and made gracious inquiries about my family members. He then asked me, "Are you on a visit to Madras?" I nodded my head. Then he said, "Are you not staying in Ramanashramam in Tiruvannamalai?" I replied, "I am a permanent resident there." Paramacharya's next words gave me a thrill. He said, "Yours is a life of contemplation in solitude, is it not?" I was unable to speak. I just nodded my head. Then he asked, "Engaging yourself in listening to Vedantic texts?" Again I nodded silently. His next question was, "Are you cooking for yourself?" Once more I nodded. I was overcome by emotion because in 3 succinct questions, Paramacharya had summed up the most significant aspects of my life at that time. I had been living alone for a long time, spending my time in contemplation and meditation. Ever since settling down in Tiruvannamalai, I had cooked my own meals. It was during that period that I had the privilege of listening to Muruganar's exposition of that immortal work, Orivil Udukkam. Obviously, Paramacharya's 3 questions gave me an emotional satisfaction beyond description. With tears in my eyes, I prayed. With Paramacharya's blessing, my life should continue along these same lines. Such is Paramacharya's compassion that he graciously lifted his palm in benediction and said with a smile, "Yes, all right." It seemed to me that Paramacharya had wanted to know the details of my life at Ramanashramam. His question had been unerringly directed at finding out these details. Having obtained this information, he smiled his approval and, with his benedictory gesture, assured me that things would continue unchanged, thus affording me the opportunity to carry on with my spiritual pursuits. Such is the power of his look that I felt totally convinced that my spiritual pursuits would proceed satisfactorily, now that I had obtained the seal of approval from Paramacharya himself. Chapter 17. It is all the same. As mentioned earlier, my parents were rather orthodox in their outlook. All my family members had great regard for the Paramacharya of Kanchi Mutt. Spiritual matters have always been given importance in my family. When at the age of 24, I decided to make Ramanashramam my permanent home, my relatives were upset. My mother was understandably worried about my physical comfort and security, but she was unable to do anything about it because I enjoyed my father's support and had his permission to stay at Ramanashramam and engage in spiritual practice. Because of their closeness to the Paramacharya of Kanchi, it is quite likely that my family informed him about my life. Someone or the other might even have requested him to intervene and to use his influence to convince me to lead a normal life. I have visited the Kanchi Acharya on many occasions. Not even once has he criticized my chosen way of life. Not once did he ask me why I could not take up the duties of a married woman. Whenever I happened to visit him, the Paramacharya always raised his hand in benediction and gave me a smile and a look full of grace. I took this to mean that he approved of my way of life and that I had the blessings in full measure. My sister-in-law told me every time she visited Paramacharya, he would ask her, "How is Ashram Kanaka?" My sister-in-law recounted this to me with obvious pride, and hearing about it made me very happy. Once, while on my visit to my grandmother in Kanjipuram, I was able to have darshan of Paramacharya every day. Soon, however, it was my time for me to return to Ramanashramam. When my grandmother came to know that I was planning to leave soon, she was upset. She wanted me to stay with her for some more time. So she went to Paramacharya and requested him to convince me to stay on in Kanchipuram for some more time. Paramacharya listened to my grandmother patiently. Then, with a smile on his lips, he said, "How does it matter whether she is at Ramanashramam or here in Kanjipuram? It is all the same." Paramacharya's words were music to my ears. I was elated because he had openly endorsed my choice. I was moved to tears by this unexpected display of his grace. Paramacharya's eyes have an indescribable power. A glance of those eyes can electrify a person and thrill him to the very core of his being. No one can remain impervious to the captivating glance of those eyes. Once caught in that mesmerizing look, one loses all sense of individuality. The mind automatically turns inwards and one gets a feeling of utter peace. One loses all desire for anything else. All one wants is to stay forever in his presence, bathed in the endless shower of his grace.